ध्वनिर्वर्णा पदम् वाक्यमित्यास्पद चतुष्टयम् यस्याः सूक्ष्मादि भेदे वाग्देवीं तामुपास्महे।
The Electronic Media Production and Research Center EMPRC of Madhya Pradesh Bhoj Open University presents an audio program on English literature. This audio program will be useful to the students of BA first year. This audio program is based on the 7th unit of first paper titled Literature in English from 1550 to 1750 AD. The title of audio program is Classical and Romantic Concepts of Imagination. To deliver the lecture on this topic, we have invited our subject expert, Dr. Vikas Jaulkar, sound edited and presented by Amar Bahadur Yadav. Now let's listen to the second and last part of audio program, Classical and Romantic Concepts of Imagination.
The topic for today's discussion is Classical and Romantic Concepts of Imagination. In part 1, we have discussed about the classical concepts of imagination, and in this part, we are going to discuss about the romantic concepts of English poetry. This lecture is meant for students of BA first year. Students, in this lecture, we are discussing about the romantic poetry and the romantic poetry with special reference to the romantic concept of imagination. After this lecture, you will be able to describe the features of romantic imagination, critically appreciate the imagination of William Wordsworth, an important romantic poet, critically appreciate the imagination of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, again a known name as far as the romantic literature is concerned, critically appreciate the imagination of P.B. Shelley, compare and contrast the classical and romantic features in literature, and thus we shall be discussing about the romantic concept of imagination. Students, before we proceed further, let us discuss about the main points of today's lecture. Romanticism, characteristics of romantic movement, romantic concept of imagination, Wordsworth's metaphysical imagination, imaginative power of Coleridge, imaginative power of Shelley, and recapitulation. Now let us discuss about romantic concept of imagination. According to Professor Herford, Romanticism was primarily an extraordinary development of imaginative sensibility. Since this lecture is about the romantic concept of romantic poetry, this quotation is very apt. This quotation is very appropriate. So, primarily an extraordinary development of imaginative sensibility. Sensibility was there as far as 17th century poets were concerned. But when we discuss of imaginative sensibility of romantic poets, then the entire approach is altogether a different approach. We know that 17th century English poets were didactic. They were not that imaginative, but romantic poetry is altogether different. So there is a marked contrast as far as the 17th century English poetry and romantic poetry is concerned, and that too with a special reference to the imaginative sensibility. Main poets of romantic era, you know, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley. Keats is also there. According to Walter Pater, it's a quotation, Romanticism is the addition of curiosity to the desire of beauty. Students, this is a well-known quotation from Walter Pater, an English critic. Romanticism is the addition of curiosity. So the two things are there. Curiosity, one need to be curious about something or someone, and desire of beauty is the ultimate goal. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. You know these famous lines written by Keats. So romanticism is the addition of curiosity to the desire of beauty. It was a revolt against political, social, religious, and literary authority, tradition, and convention. You know, it was a revolt against the 17th century poetry. Before that, John Donne wrote poems, and that was the metaphysical age of poetry. Then came Dryden and Pope. They followed a specific path. Rule of law was an important hallmark for those poets, but romantic poetry was a revolt against not only the writings but the political, social, religious, and literary authority, tradition, and convention. You are well aware that Rousseau was an important person who was a model for all the romantic poets. The movement was influenced by the teachings of Rousseau. Again, Rousseau, an important name in the history of English literature, who influenced romantic poets, and the principles of French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity were also important features. The romantic poets were influenced by these three segments: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Characteristics of romantic movement. It was a movement. According to Victor Hugo, romanticism is liberalism in literature. Liberal, they were very liberal. They were not the poets who used to follow set path, set rules, and this liberalism in literature was again a characteristic feature as far as romantic writers were concerned. Here we are discussing about the romantic poets, especially spontaneity and vividness. These again are two characteristic features of romantic poetry. Spontaneity. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So this was the definition of poetry. Poetry was the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So the spontaneous nature of the critical mind and vividness. That means a lot number of subjects were discussed. Nature, again metaphysical aspects of nature, then the supernatural aspects of nature, simple human life and such features, and also the language which was of common man's. So these were certain hallmarks of the romantic poetry. Now let us discuss about the characteristics of romantic movement. Aspects of nature and medieval atmosphere. Aspects of nature. Students who have already undergone poem of Wordsworth, and in Wordsworth, Tinton Abbey especially, and in other poems, nature is an important source of inspiration for him. Medieval atmosphere again, Keats is the best example for the medieval atmosphere. Though you have short poems of poets, but these poets are known for their treatment of nature and treatment of medieval atmosphere. Coleridge is also an example of this. Variety and individuality. Again, variety and individuality. Though there is variety in treatment, variety in subjects, but every romantic poet is a different romantic poet. Wordsworth cannot be equated with Coleridge. Coleridge cannot be equated with Shelley, and Shelley cannot be equated with Keats. Why? Because they are known for their individuality. and their individuality is something which again becomes the characteristic feature of romantic poetry. Wordsworth, known for simple human nature, simple nature, metaphysical, imaginative capability and power. Then Coleridge, known for supernatural element. Keats, known for his medieval atmosphere, and Shelley, known for his lyrical quality. So, variety and individuality in subjects, but different in approach and techniques. This is an important characteristic feature of romantic poetry. All the poets approached the subject material differently and followed different techniques of imagination and treatment of the subject. Native and simple life. Wordsworth is the best example of this characteristic feature, native and simple life. In your course content, Tinton Abbey and Coleridge's Frost at Midnight are superb examples. Lyric is the mode of expression. Especially Shelley is known for his lyrical quality. What is lyric? Lyric is a form of poetry, short but very easily to be sung. That means there is a quality of singing. So, lyric becomes the mode for Shelley, especially as far as his imaginative expression is concerned. Interest in the Middle Ages. Scott, again a novelist, and Keats, a romantic poet, are best examples of interest in the Middle Ages. Why? Because they treated the subject beautifully, and not only treated the subject, but their approach towards the entire subject material and the expression were very difficult to be found in other romantic poets. Varied poetic forms. Again, if Keats makes use of heroic couplet, then Shelley, Wordsworth are lyricists. Coleridge and Keats again make use of different poetic forms which are easily to be discerned, and all the romantic poets are different in their approach, but in most of the cases poetic forms are the same. Romantic imagination. Let us discuss about the imagination. We have already discussed image and imagination. It is basically a mental faculty, a creative faculty, an imaginative venture into the depths of the soul. This is a trait of romantic poetry. Soul is very important. Unless it comes out of soul, there cannot be a better expression of the ideas. So, the imaginative venture into the depths of the soul becomes a hallmark of English romantic poetry. Concentration and the inner reality of mind. Concentration is important because unless the poet concentrates on the subject material, he or she cannot give an expression to it properly, and the inner reality of mind is equally important because imagination is the mental faculty. According to Blake, this world of imagination is a world of eternity. So, Blake says that eternity is an important feature of the romantic poetry. Imaginative exploration of the rough and rugged mountains pass. Again, treatment of nature. Overthrow of values, no antagonism. Overthrow of values. Here, the romantic poet does not believe in set pattern and there is no antagonism. So, he is free from all unnecessarily known or expressed things, and here liberty, equality and fraternity are the three important segments which influence the romantic poetry at large. A continuous journey. It's a continuous journey. Why? Because the romantic poets starts from the subject material and treats the subject material beautifully so as to give you an idea which is a wholesome idea. So, there is no break anywhere, and right from the beginning to the end, you have a nice treatment of the subject, making use of the appropriate poetic form. Wordsworth's metaphysical imagination. Human life in transcendental terms. He is known a metaphysical imaginative poet because of the transcendental ideas or because of the transcendental approach of his subject material. Here is a type of religion that is involved in his poetry. In school days, he fell into a transport of vision. Right from the beginning, he was a visionary, and this habit of mind pervades all his poetry. So right from the beginning, since he had a faculty of imagination, he made use of the imagination to treat his subject in a lot number of ways. Tintern Abbey is a good example which is in your course content. Actual landscapes and simple human views can easily to be found in the poems of William Wordsworth. At times looks beyond space and times. Again, this is a feature of his metaphysical imagination. He looks beyond space and time. That means not only of this world but of other world also. The ode, Intimations of Immortality, is bold in speculation, though you don't have this in your course content, but you must read this ode so as to appreciate characteristic features of the poet. Emerson called it, Intimations of Immortality, the high water mark. High water mark means it was a very distinct poem to be compared with other poems. Looks back with passionate regret to the last radiance of his childhood. Students, Wordsworth is also known for his childhood treatment of subject. So right from the beginning, so you have Coleridge also in your course content, and this childhood behavior of his child is easily to be discerned in the poem Frost at Midnight. Connects it with manhood and the old age. So a type of continuity prevails over there as far as the poems of Wordsworth are concerned. Right from the beginning to the end, to the culmination, you have a connectivity which cannot be easily broken. Our noisy ears see moments in the being of the external silence. So this external silence is important in these lines. The noisy ear see moments in the being of the external silence. So there is a type of continuity in our life also. The poem is an example of metaphysical imagination. Wordsworth's imagination in Tintern Abbey. Students, you have this poem in your course content. The imagination came in years later, but during school days. Right from the beginning, he was an imaginative person. His imaginative capability was to be discerned in the early years, and his love for nature turned into a type of religious love. 3 stages of manhood are easily to be discerned in this poem. The sounding contract haunted me like a passion, the tall rock, the mountain. Again, the sounding contract haunted me like a passion. Right from the beginning to the end, the poet discusses about the 3 stages and ultimate culmination. Deep gloomy wood, their colors and their ferns were then tune and appetite. These are lines from Tintern Abbey. S.T. Coleridge. Imaginative power of Coleridge. Intense imaginative power. Intense means he was very imaginative because he was a supernatural poet. He saw nature in a very distinct manner as compared to what Wordsworth saw. Superbly controlled. All the aspects of nature are to be found in the poems of S.T. Coleridge, and the treatment of the subject material is superbly controlled as we see things happening. Artistic sense. There is a type of artistic sense also, because it's not boredom. We as readers are always appreciating whatever he wished to say, and the entire treatment looked like a real treatment. supernatural element and obscurity. Because of supernatural element, Coleridge becomes a obscure poet, difficult to understand. It produces willing suspension of disbelief. Students, this is an important quotation. Willing suspension of disbelief. You are in first year, but in later stages, it becomes an important quotation. Why? Because we are compelled to believe. Here, whatever Coleridge says in his The Ancient Mariner or poems of supernatural element, we are compelled to believe, as if we believe in whatever he say. Sky, sea and remote aspects of things described. This is also to be found in Frost at Midnight, which is in your course content. Use of images in Coleridge's Frost at Midnight. All the images are appropriate. That means there is no inappropriateness about anything. They are suggestive. They suggest something. The action of the childhood, the father, and the thinking process on part of the father. First section, image of stillness going on of life, inaudible as dreams. Second section of image of music, ringing of the bells from morning to evening. And third section, image of happiness, cradled by my side, thrills of my heart. Now, imaginative power of Shelley. Mind, imagination and emotional self. Shelley is known for these three important segments. He is called the ideal of the idealists, and Shelley is known for his lyric. Students, lyric is an important poetic form, a short one which is easily to be sung. To him, life is like a dome of many-colored glass, though this quotation doesn't appear in any of your poems prescribed in the course content, but it speaks of the philosophy of life, since he is ideal of the idealists. It makes his poetry unintelligible. It is not that unintelligible which can be said about St. Coleridge because of the supernatural element, but there are certain phrases and words which are difficult to understand. According to Hudson, he was a dreamer of dreams and he is known for myth-making power. Myth again is an important segment in literature, and the revolt of the Islam and Prometheus Unbound are two examples, though they are not in your course content. And his poetry is full of personifications where, especially in Adonis, he mourns over the dead body of Keats. And in Queen Mab, Shelley hoped there would be a change. He says, "All into perfect happiness and urge the restless wheels of being on their way." Now, let us discuss about the contrast between classicism and romanticism. According to Scott James, the classic tend to emphasize this worldliness. Dryden, Pope, they discussed about their society, the happenings in their society, the persons in their society, whereas the romantic stresses otherworldliness and unknown, otherworldliness which is not to be found in this world and which are unknown. Proper study of man is mankind. You have in your course content Shadwell and Pope's an essay on criticism. So, the characteristic features of these two poems are not to be found in romantic poets because they look for strange and unknown places. Classicals appeal to tradition, whereas romantics demand for new. It was a revolt against the rule of law in literature, and this is an important characteristic feature of the romantic movement. Classicism tends to order, lucidity and passion. Heroic couplet is an example, and romanticism tends to freedom and fancy. So, the imaginative part is very important as far as the romantic literature is concerned, which is devoid of in classical poets. According to Douglas Bush, romanticism represents the turning away from classicism, from reason to sense. For the classicals, reason was important. For romantics, sense, imagination and intuition were important. To the primitive, medieval and urban, from urban society to the rural solitude. Wordsworth discusses about the simple human life. From actuality to the mysterious. Dryden and Pope, especially in poems like Shadwell and Essay on Criticism, they satirize people, but with romantic poets this was not the case. So, from actuality to the mysterious romantics, They believed in the mysterious, and Coleridge again is an important example as far as the supernatural element in his poetry is concerned. From preoccupation with human nature, Wordsworth discusses about human nature beautifully in all his poems, and Coleridge especially in the poem which is prescribed in your course content, Frost at Midnight. With eternal nature from satire to myth, Dryden and Pope satirize people and actions, but the romantic poets don't believe in these two things and they are mythical. Then, from expression of accepted moral truth to the discovery of beauty, Keats says beauty is truth, truth beauty, which was never said by any of the 17th century poets. From impersonal objectivity to subjectivism, and from public to private themes. Impersonal objectivity. In Pope, you don't have any personal comment, but in romantic poetry, we find that private themes are also to be discussed. From the poetry of prose statement, the 17th century poetry was more like a prose statement to image and symbol, from poetic diction to common language, whereas the romantic poets make use of the language which is a language of the common people. Recapitulation. Students, let us discuss about the conclusive part. Chief characteristics of romantic poetry are liberalism, variety, individuality, the native nature, and simple life. Liberalism, they broke the rule of law of 17th century poetry. Variety, a lot number of themes were discussed. Nature was there, religion was there in a different manner, supernatural elements were there. Then Keats is known for his odes. Individuality, all the romantic poets are different in the treatment of their subject material. Native, they discussed about the common man, the language of the common man, and simple, rustic human life. Imagination was the creative faculty for romantic poets. It was not the didactic element, but the imagination which was at the back of their mind, and they created art out of this imaginative faculty. Wordsworth is known for his metaphysical imagination, his vision, landscapes, and simple humanity. In Downton Abbey, you have some of these characteristic features. Coleridge is known for his artistic and supernatural imagination. He describes sky, sea, and remote aspects. In your course content, you have Frost at Midnight, and some of the characteristic features can easily to be found in the poem of Coleridge. Shelley is called a dreamer of dreams, and Shelley is known for his myth-making power. Here, Adonis is an example. Shelley is known for his lyrics, again a form of poetry. Students, for examination purposes, there are certain books which you must consultate. Albert E., History of English Literature, O'Brien J., An Anthology of English Literature, which is in your course content. It's a textbook and you must go through this book. Prasad B., A Background to the Study of English Literature. This is important for knowing the concepts and the forms of literature. Goodman W.R., though it's a bulky book, but it's very necessary for understanding. Goodman W.R., History of English Literature, Volume 2, the romantic concepts and certain classical elements are to be found in this book. So, students, we have discussed about the classical concept of imagination in this lecture. Thank you very much.
You were listening to second and last part of an audio program, Classical and Romantic Concepts of Imagination. Subject expert and speaker was Dr. Vikas Jaulkar. Announcer was Vinita Jain. This audio program was edited and presented by Amar Bahadur Yadav. This program was produced by the Electronic Media Production and Research Center EMPRC of Madhya Pradesh Bhoj Open University in association with NITTTR Bhopal.